Have you ever stood at a wedding and watched two people promise forever? Have you noticed how the words sound so easy in that moment, so pure, so certain? And have you ever wondered what happens years later when those same words become background noise in a life that moved too fast? Saint Teresa of Ávila saw something during prayer that changed how she understood marriage. Not as a ceremony, but as a battlefield where souls either win or lose. Eternity. She saw what happens when the promise made on a wedding day begins to fade, not all at once, not with betrayal or violence, but slowly, quietly, like frost creeping across glass until you cannot see through it anymore. Teresa lived in 16th century Spain, born in 1515 in the city of Ávila, a place of stone walls and cold winters. She entered the Carmelite order at age 20, spent decades reforming convents, and died in 1582. But between those years, God showed her visions that terrified her, visions she wrote down under obedience, visions the church preserved because they revealed truths people needed to hear. If you value documented stories of the saints like this, subscribe. It is the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you are hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from Teresa's own writings in the Book of Her Life and the Interior Castle, preserved in the original manuscripts at the Convento de San Jose in Ávila, and from the testimonies collected during her canonization process in 1522, documented in the Acta Sanctorum volumes published by the Bollandists in Antwerp. Now back to the information. Teresa wrote that one afternoon while she was in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament, she fell into what she called a rapture. Her body became still, her breathing slowed, and in her spirit she saw a married couple standing in a church. She recognized the moment. It was their wedding day. The bride wore white, the groom stood beside her. A priest held their hands together. They spoke the vows. I promise to be faithful. I promise to honor you. I promise to love you all the days of my life. Teresa saw their faces, young, hopeful. She saw the sincerity in their eyes. This was not a lie. They meant every word, but then the vision shifted. Time moved forward, not years, decades. Teresa saw the same two people, now older, sitting in the same house, in different rooms. The wife at a table, the husband in a chair, silence between them. Not the silence of peace, the silence of two people who stopped trying. She saw the husband come home from work. He did not look at his wife. He sat down. He ate. He spoke only when necessary. Short answers, functional words, no warmth, no interest. The wife cleaned the dishes. She moved around the kitchen like a ghost in her own home. She had stopped asking him questions years ago because the answers were always the same. Fine, tired, nothing. Teresa watched this for what felt like hours in her vision, though she later wrote it may have been only minutes in real time. She saw the same pattern repeat, day after day, week after week. The man left for work. The woman stayed home. They passed each other in hallways. They slept in the same bed but lived in separate worlds. There was no fighting, no shouting, no dramatic sin, just absence. The promise was still there on paper. They were still married. But the life of the promise had died. Then Teresa saw something that made her weep. She saw the moment the husband's heart turned cold. It was not one big event. It was a series of small choices. He stopped asking his wife how her day went. He stopped holding her hand during prayer. He stopped looking at her when she spoke. And each time he made that choice, Teresa saw a small dark thread wrap around his heart. One thread, then another, until his heart was bound so tightly that he could no longer feel anything for the woman he had promised to love. The wife was not innocent either. Teresa saw her pull away. She stopped dressing with care. She stopped smiling when he entered the room. She stopped praying for him. She began to see him as a burden, as an obligation, as something she had to endure rather than someone she had chosen. And the same dark threads wrapped around her heart too. Tighter and tighter, until she felt nothing. Teresa wrote later that this was the vision that shook her more than any vision of hell or purgatory, because these were not evil people. They were baptized. They went to Mass. They did not commit adultery. They did not abandon each other. They stayed, but they stayed without love. And Teresa saw that this, in the eyes of God, was a kind of slow death, a death of the soul while the body still lived. She saw the moment each of them died. The husband first. He was 73 years old. He died in his bed. His wife was in the next room. She heard him call out once. She did not go to him. She waited. She listened. Then silence. She walked to the door. She opened it. She saw him lying still. And she felt nothing. No grief. No relief. Nothing. Just emptiness. Teresa saw his soul leave his body. She saw it rise. And then she saw something she had only seen a few times before. She saw the judgment, not with words, not with a trial, but with light. A light so pure, so revealing that every hidden thing became visible, every promise made, every promise broken, every moment of coldness, every refusal to love, every thread of darkness wrapped around his heart, all of it visible in an instant. And Teresa saw the question that was not spoken but was understood. Did you love her? Did you keep the promise you made before me? Did you give yourself the way I gave myself for you? And the man had no answer, because the answer was no. He had not loved. He had existed beside her. He had fulfilled the legal contract, but he had not loved. Teresa wrote that she saw him fall, not into hell immediately, but into a place of fire that was not the fire of eternal punishment, but the fire of purification, purgatory. She saw him burning, not his body, his soul, and the pain was not from flames touching skin. The pain was from seeing clearly for the first time what he had done, what he had refused to do. The pain was regret so deep it felt like being torn apart. He cried out, not with his voice, but with his soul. He called his wife's name. He begged her to pray for him, but she could not hear him. She was still alive. She buried him 3 days later. She stood at his grave. She felt nothing. And Teresa saw that this was the most terrible part. Even in death they were separated. Even in death the coldness remained. The wife lived another 9 years. Alone? She did not remarry. She did not seek companionship. She went to Mass every Sunday. She prayed her rosary. She did everything outwardly correct, but inside, her heart was still bound, still cold, still empty. And when she died at age 81, Teresa saw her soul rise as well. She saw the same light, the same judgment, the same question. Did you love him? Did you keep your promise? And the same answer, no. Teresa saw her enter purgatory as well, and she saw the two souls there, burning separately, each crying out for the other, each finally understanding what they had lost, what they had wasted, what they had refused. And Teresa saw that they could not reach each other even there, because in life they had chosen distance, and in death that distance remained until it was purified. If you are still watching, subscribe. It helps more than you know. Also leave a comment about which city you are hearing this from. Now back to the story. Teresa wrote this vision down in her personal journal in 1567, 3 years after she founded the Reformed Carmelite convent in Ávila. She showed it to her confessor, Father Garcia de Toledo, who ordered her to write it in fuller detail. She obeyed. The full account was preserved and later included in the collected testimonies used during her canonization process. The document was examined by theologians in Rome, including Cardinal Robert Bellarmine, who verified its authenticity in 1601. But the vision did not end there. Teresa wrote that a few nights later, she was again in prayer when she saw another married couple. This time, the vision was different. She saw the same wedding day, the same vows, the same promises. But then, she saw what happened in the years after. This husband came home every evening and found his wife. He asked her about her day. He listened, really listened. When she was tired, he helped with the work. When she was sad, he sat with her. He did not fix everything, he just stayed. The wife did the same. She welcomed him when he returned. She prepared meals not out of duty, but out of love. She prayed for him every morning. She thanked God for him every night. And when arguments came, because they did come, they did not retreat into silence. They spoke. They forgave. They returned to the promise. I will love you. I will honor you. I will be faithful. Teresa saw them grow old together. She saw wrinkles form on their faces. She saw their bodies slow. She saw sickness come. And she saw them care for each other through it. The husband held his wife's hand when she could not walk. The wife wiped her husband's face when fever burned him. They prayed together. They suffered together. They loved together. And when the husband died, Teresa saw his soul rise. She saw the same light, the same judgment, the same question. Did you love her? And this time the answer was yes. Imperfect, stumbling, full of mistakes. But yes. He had loved. He had tried. He had returned to the promise even when it was hard. And Teresa saw him welcomed into heaven not as a reward for perfection, but as a completion of what had begun on his wedding day. He had become what he had promised to become, a man who loved. The wife lived 7 more years, alone, but not empty. She carried the love they had built. She spoke to him in prayer. She felt his presence. And when her time came, Teresa saw her soul rise as well. She saw the light, the question, the answer. Yes, I loved him. And Teresa saw her welcomed into the same place. And she saw them together again, not as they had been on their wedding day, but as they had become, perfected, complete, united not just by promise, but by the keeping of that promise. Teresa wrote that these 2 visions taught her more about marriage than any sermon or theological treatise ever could. She wrote that the difference between the 2 couples was not one big choice, but 1,000 small choices. The choice to speak or to remain silent, the choice to draw near or to pull away, the choice to forgive or to hold grudges, the choice to serve or to demand service, every day, every hour, every moment. She wrote that the wedding day is not the end. It is the beginning. The promise made, that day is not a guarantee. It is a seed. And like every seed, it must be watered. It must be tended. It must be protected. If it is ignored, it dies. And when the promise dies, the souls who made it begin to die as well. Not physically, but spiritually. They become hollow, they become ghosts, they become two people, living in the same house but no longer living the same life. Teresa also wrote that she understood why God showed her these visions. It was not to condemn marriage. It was to reveal its power. Because marriage, she wrote, is the only sacrament where two people become the ministers to each other. A priest gives you baptism. A bishop gives you confirmation. But in marriage, you give the sacrament to each other. You become the means of grace for each other. And if you refuse to give that grace, if you refuse to love, then you are refusing God himself. She wrote that the souls in purgatory she saw were not there because they committed adultery or violence. They were there because they committed the sin of indifference. They had promised to love and they chose not to. And that choice, Teresa wrote, offends God more deeply than many realize. Because love is not a feeling, love is a decision. And when you promise to make that decision every day for the rest of your life, and then you stop making it, you are breaking a vow made not just to another person, but to God who witnessed it. Teresa also saw something else. She saw that many marriages die not because of one person's failure, but because both people stop trying at the same time. The husband grows distant, the wife grows cold. And instead of fighting to return to the promise, they accept the distance. They make peace with the emptiness. They convince themselves that this is just how marriage becomes after years pass. And Teresa wrote that this is a lie from the enemy, because God designed marriage to grow deeper with time, not colder, to grow richer, not emptier. She wrote that the couples who reached heaven were not couples who never struggled. They struggled greatly. They had seasons of doubt, of frustration, of exhaustion, but they did not quit. They returned to the promise again and again. Even when it felt impossible, even when they did not feel love, they chose to act in love, and over time the feeling returned, stronger, deeper, rooted not in emotion, but in decision, in covenant. Teresa shared these visions with other sisters in her convent. She told them that marriage is one of the highest callings, not lower than religious life, but different. She said that those called to marriage carry a cross that is just as heavy as any monastic vow, the cross of daily fidelity, the cross of staying when everything in you wants to leave, the cross of loving when you do not feel like loving. And she said that those who carry this cross faithfully, who die still holding on to the promise, will receive a crown in heaven that shines as brightly as any saint who lived in a cloister. But she also warned that the failure to keep this promise leads to a suffering that few understand, because the breaking of a wedding vow is not like the breaking of any other promise. It is a tearing of what God has joined. And when something God has joined is torn, it leaves wounds that last beyond death, wounds that must be healed in purgatory, wounds that could have been avoided if the promise had been kept. Teresa died in 1582 on October 4th in Alba de Tormes while traveling between convents. She was 67 years old. Her body was found incorrupt years later when the coffin was opened for examination. No decay, no smell. The flesh remained soft, the wounds from her mystical experiences still visible. Her writings were studied and approved by theologians across Europe over the next 40 years. She was canonized in 1622 by Pope Gregory XV after a thorough investigation that included the examination of over 6,000 pages of testimony from those who knew her. Her visions were examined, tested, and confirmed by multiple theological commissions. The University of Salamanca appointed 3 professors of theology to review her manuscripts in 1588. They spent 2 years analyzing every vision, every claim, every detail. They compared her writings with scripture, with church fathers, with established doctrine. Their conclusion, written in a document now preserved in the university archives, stated that Teresa's visions bore the marks of genuine divine revelation, interior knowledge of souls, prophetic accuracy, theological precision, and most importantly, fruit. The visions led people to holiness, not to error, and among all her writings, this vision of the 2 married couples remained one of the most powerful, because it spoke to something every person knows: the danger of forgetting, the danger of drifting, the danger of letting the promise fade into background noise. But it also spoke to something people needed to understand, that marriage is a spiritual reality, not just a social one, that the vows spoken on a wedding day create a bond that reaches into eternity, and that the way you live those vows determines not just your happiness here, but your destiny there. In 1633, a Spanish priest named Father Antonio de San Joaquin published a commentary on Teresa's visions in a book titled The Mirror of Marriage. The book ran to 470 pages and sold over 3,000 copies in its first year, a remarkable number for 17th century publishing. He wrote that in his 50 years of hearing confessions in the Diocese of Toledo, sitting in the wooden confessional box 6 hours every day except Sunday, he had seen countless marriages die the slow death Teresa described. He wrote that the most common sin he encountered was not adultery or abuse, but coldness, husbands who no longer looked at their wives when they spoke, Wives who no longer prayed for their husbands by name, but only in vague general terms. Couples who lived together in houses in Toledo, in Madrid, in Seville, but loved separately, existing in parallel lives that never truly intersected. And he wrote that when he asked them why, when he pressed them to explain how they had arrived at this state, they always gave the same answer, spoken in almost identical words regardless of their age or station. We drifted. We did not mean to. We did not plan it, but we did. And now we do not know how to come back. We do not even know if we want to come back. Father Antonio wrote that Teresa's vision was a warning written in fire, a warning that drift is not innocent, it is not passive. It is a choice made 100 times a day in 100 small moments. The choice to engage with your spouse or to retreat into your own world. The choice to speak honestly or to stay silent and let resentment build. The choice to forgive the small offenses or to hold on to them like precious stones you count at night. And each choice builds on the last, brick by brick, until you have built a wall between you that seems impossible to tear down. He also wrote something that shocked many of his readers at the time. He wrote that the solution is simple but not easy. So simple that people reject it because they are looking for something more complicated, more sophisticated, more worthy of the problem. Return to the promise. Go back to the words you spoke. Speak them again, out loud, not in your head, out loud where you can hear them. I love you, I honor you, I choose you. Not because you feel it in this moment, not because your spouse deserves it today, but because you promised it before God and you refuse to be a liar. And over time, Father Antonio wrote, if both people return, if both people choose this path, if both people fight daily to keep the promise alive, despite how they feel, despite what their spouse has done or failed to do, the warmth returns, the life returns, the love returns. Not the same as it was on the wedding day when everything was new and untested, better, deeper, stronger. A love that has been tested by time and difficulty and found faithful. A love that knows what it costs and chooses to pay it anyway. In 1702, a Carmelite nun named Sister Beatriz de Jesus in the convent of San Jose in Madrid wrote a letter to her younger sister Isabel, who was struggling in her marriage of 12 years. The letter, preserved in the convent archives and catalogued as Letter 73 in the Madrid collection, spans 14 pages of careful script written in brown ink on parchment. Sister Beatrice quoted Teresa's vision at length, copying entire passages from memory because the vision had been read aloud in her convent every year on the feast of Saint Teresa. She wrote that marriage is not about perfection. It is about persistence. It is not about never failing or never feeling cold toward your spouse or never wanting to quit. It is about never actually quitting. She wrote that every marriage, without exception, has seasons of winter, seasons where everything feels cold and dead and hopeless, where you look at your husband and feel nothing, where the thought of spending another 50 years with this person fills you with quiet despair. But winter is not the end. It is a test to see if you will hold on, if you will continue to act in love even when feeling is absent until spring comes. And spring always comes, she wrote. If you hold on, if you refuse to let go of the promise, if you continue to water the seed even when you cannot see any growth. Her sister Isabel kept that letter for 43 years. When she died in 1745 at age 68, her children found it folded inside her prayer book, the pages worn soft from repeated reading. They donated it to the Carmelite convent where their aunt had lived. The letter is now displayed in a glass case in the convent museum in Madrid, open to the page where Sister Beatrice wrote in large letters, underlined twice, "Do not quit. The promise is stronger than the feeling." Teresa's vision spread through Spain in the 1600s, through France in the 1700s, through Italy and Portugal and the Catholic regions of Germany. It was read in convents during community prayers. It was preached in churches during marriage preparation courses. It was whispered in confessionals when couples came seeking help for dying marriages. And slowly, measurably, it began to change how people saw marriage. Not as a contract that could be negotiated or ignored when inconvenient, not as a social arrangement designed primarily for property and children, but as a holy promise that required daily renewal, daily conscious effort, daily choice to love. In the 18th century, a bishop in Ávila ordered that every couple preparing for marriage must hear Teresa's vision read aloud during their final meeting with the priest. He wanted them to know what they were promising, not just for one day, but for a lifetime. He wanted them to know that the promise would be tested, that there would be days they would not want to keep it, and that those would be the days when keeping it mattered most. In 1923, a Carmelite historian named Father Gabriel de Santa Maria Magdalena published a comprehensive study of Teresa's marriage visions. The book, titled The Covenant of Love, Saint Teresa and the Sacrament of Marriage, ran to 680 pages and included appendices with over 200 documented testimonies. He had spent 7 years collecting letters and statements from people across Spain, France, Italy, and the Americas, who claimed Teresa's vision had directly impacted their marriages. He collected testimonies that filled filing cabinets in his small office in Burgos. One man, a merchant from Barcelona named Joaquin Ramirez, wrote that he had been planning to leave his wife in 1918 after 22 years of marriage. Not because she had done anything wrong, not because there was another woman, but because he felt nothing anymore when he looked at her. He felt dead inside, he wrote, like a man going through the motions of a life that no longer held meaning. He had consulted a lawyer. He had begun separating his finances quietly. He was 3 weeks away from telling his wife when a priest gave him a small booklet containing Teresa's vision. He read it on a Tuesday evening in his study. He saw himself in the first couple with a clarity that terrified him. He saw the dark threads wrapping around his heart, thread by thread, year by year, choice by choice. He saw where he was heading, purgatory, burning, crying out for prayers that might never come because he had built such distance that his wife might feel nothing at his death. And he made a choice. He tore up the lawyer's documents. He went downstairs. He sat with his wife at the kitchen table. He told her everything. How distant he had become. How dead he had felt. How close he had come to leaving. And he asked her to forgive him. They began again that night. Not from where they had ended, bitter and cold, but from where they had started 22 years earlier when they made the promise. They spoke the vows to each other again, sitting at that kitchen table, weeping. And then they began the work of rebuilding. It took years, Joaquin wrote in his testimony. Years of daily choices, years of forcing conversations when silence felt easier, years of serving when resentment tempted him to retreat. But the warmth returned, the life returned. And when he wrote his testimony to Father Gabriel in 1922, he had been married 32 years, and he wrote that he loved his wife more deeply than he had ever thought possible. Not the shallow infatuation of youth, but something tested, something that had survived winter, something real. Another woman, a teacher from Salamanca named Carmen Ortiz, wrote that she had been living in the same house as her husband, but had stopped speaking to him except when absolutely necessary for household management. She had convinced herself this was acceptable, even mature. This was just how marriage became after the romance faded, she told herself. Everyone said it. Her mother had lived this way. Her friends lived this way. Why should she expect different? She read Teresa's vision in 1921 in a church pamphlet during Sunday Mass. She saw herself in the cold wife. She saw the emptiness waiting at the end of that road, and she wept right there in the pew, embarrassing herself, unable to stop. She prayed desperately. She asked God to help her love again, to help her feel something other than resentment and weariness toward the man she had promised to love until death. And slowly, through daily acts of service that felt mechanical at first, through forced conversations that became gradually more real, through prayers offered when she did not want to pray, the coldness melted. It took 18 months, she wrote. 18 months of showing up, of choosing, of acting as if she loved him even when she did not feel it. And then one morning she woke up and realized the feeling had returned. Not suddenly, gradually. Like spring, arriving so slowly you do not notice until the trees have leaves again, she wrote that it was like falling in love again. Not with a stranger, but with the man she had promised to love 36 years earlier in the Cathedral of Salamanca on a cold February morning in 1885. She wrote her testimony to Father Gabriel in 1922 when she was 58 years old. Her husband died 2 years later. She wrote to Father Gabriel again after her husband's death. She told him that her husband died holding her hand, that his last words were to thank her for not giving up on him, for not giving up on their promise. She wrote that she knew with certainty where his soul had gone, not to purgatory for coldness, but to heaven for faithfulness. These testimonies filled Father Gabriel's book, hundreds of them, from Spain, from France, from Italy, from Mexico, from Argentina, merchants and teachers, farmers and nobles, young couples and old, all saying variations of the same thing. The vision woke them up. It showed them where they were heading if they continued on their current path, and it gave them a chance to turn around before it was too late, before coldness became permanent, before the threads wrapped so tightly that the heart could no longer feel. In 1958, a Carmelite convent in Lisbon held a conference on marriage. They invited married couples to attend. They read Teresa's vision aloud, and then they asked the couples to share what they heard. An older man stood. He said he had been married for 60 years. His wife sat beside him. He said that every year on their anniversary, they reread Teresa's vision together. They used it as a mirror. They asked each other, are we drifting? Are we pulling away? Are we keeping the promise? And he said that this practice, this annual examination, had kept their marriage alive. Not perfect, but alive. A younger woman spoke. She said she had been married only 5 years. She said the vision terrified her because she already saw the patterns forming. The silence, the distance, the cold threads beginning to wrap. She said she did not want to become the couple Teresa saw burning in purgatory. She wanted to become the couple Teresa saw entering heaven. And so she and her husband made a pact. Every night before bed, no matter how tired, no matter how frustrated, they would hold hands and pray together. 5 minutes. That was all. But those 5 minutes kept them connected, kept the promise alive. Teresa of Ávila never married. She never experienced the struggles she saw in her visions, but God used her to reveal a truth that married people needed to hear, a truth that is still needed today, that marriage is not automatic, it is not self-sustaining, it requires intention, it requires effort, it requires the choice to love when love feels impossible. In 2003, the Vatican published a document on marriage that quoted Teresa's vision. The document stated that the greatest threat to modern marriage is not infidelity, but indifference. It is the slow fade, the quiet drift, the assumption that the promise made on the wedding day will carry itself forward without daily renewal. And the document called couples to return to what Teresa saw, to fight for the promise, to refuse the cold threads, to choose love every day. Teresa's vision is still read in marriage preparation courses across the world. It is still quoted in homilies. It is still shared in counseling sessions, because the truth it reveals has not changed. The promise made on a wedding day is the easiest promise to make, but it is the hardest promise to keep. And the keeping of it determines not just the quality of your life, but the state of your soul at death. In 2019, a research team at the University of Salamanca examined the records from Teresa's canonization process. They found a document dated 1620 that had been sealed for 400 years. Inside was a testimony from a woman who claimed Teresa appeared to her in a dream 2 months after Teresa's death. The woman was considering leaving her husband. In the dream, Teresa stood before her and said only one sentence. "The promise you made is the promise that will judge you." The woman woke. She stayed. She wrote that those words haunted her for the rest of her life. In a good way. They kept her anchored. They kept her faithful. The document is now kept in the archives of the Convento de San Jose in Ávila, stored in a temperature-controlled vault. Alongside Teresa's original manuscripts, it is marked with the reference number CSJ 1582/517, accessible only to accredited researchers with written permission from the Archbishop of Ávila. The testimony includes the woman's full name, Maria Dolores Suarez, age 32 at the time of the vision, resident of Toledo, married 8 years. She died in 1643 at age 65. Her death record, held in the parish archives of Santa Maria de Toledo, notes that she died with her husband of 45 years holding her hand. The document is now kept in the archives of the Convento de San Jose in Ávila, stored in a temperature-controlled vault alongside Teresa's original manuscripts. It is marked with the reference number CSJ 1582/517, accessible only to accredited researchers with written permission from the Archbishop of Ávila. The testimony includes the woman's full name, Maria Dolores Suarez, age 32 at the time of the vision, resident of Toledo, married 8 years. She died in 1643 at age 65. Her death record, held in the parish archives of Santa Maria de Toledo, notes that she died with her husband of 45 years holding her hand.